newspaper. I'm one of the first forms of media to be used in American politics, starting when the first one was printed in the U.S. in 1784. From then, many early presidents were connected with a political newspaper that voiced the views of their administration. Through me, information was able to circulate to many people at once, but in contentious elections, this wasn't always a good thing, as I have been used to both promote and tear down different opponents in an election. I specifically remember the election of 1800 between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. This was an emotional and hard-fought campaign that was fueled by the first presidential newspaper, the Washington, D.C. National Intelligencer. It was used to promote Thomas Jefferson's election and the principles of Jeffersonian republicanism. Many of the articles were propaganda to outline what the world would be if Jefferson was elected, such as, quote-unquote, the principles of the revolution restored and the nation at peace with the world, while condemning John Adams in a similar manner. As the main source of media at the time, I was used to support and spread ideas that the president wanted to share. And even now, in the 2020 election, newspapers are written to display political news. The main difference is that now I am less a source of propaganda and more a source of information. As new technologies come along, my role has shifted, but I've never truly stopped being a method for a president to use and push an agenda or gain support.
The radio, invented in 1895, I came into play at a larger scale after World War I. The very first president to be heard on my airwaves was Warren G. Harding in June 1922, and he also holds the honor of being the first president to install me in the White House. The first official presidential radio broadcast, however, belonged to Calvin Coolidge, the successor of Harding. My usage at important state events like inaugurations and speeches in the early 1930s represented a shift in expectations of presidential power and responsibility, which had increased as a result of the earlier progressive era. My role as an audible newspaper became best used by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who chose to speak directly to the people via radio in an informal setting with what came to be known as fireside chats. I remember he chose me to spread his message as radio messages, unlike the newspaper, were unable to be altered, and they could reach a much wider and more diverse audience, exactly the kind of people he needed to hear him crush rumors created by the press culture and also to introduce his ambitious New Deal plans. In these early days of my existence, I was still a formal medium and something respected and official. FDR helped to change that, and I began to evolve alongside the presidency into something accessible, casual, and more revered. Nowadays, my usage is broad and sometimes left behind in favor of more modern technologies, but my role in shaping the early 20th century presidencies cannot be understated.
Hi, television here. I first became commercially available to the public in 1946, and just like my good friend the radio, it wasn't long before I was a staple in every home. Although, I try not to talk about it too much in front of radio. It's been years, but I swear, they're still mad at me for replacing them. What can I say? Of course the people prefer me. I've got everything radio has, and moving images to go along with it. Anyway, in 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the first presidential candidate to use me as a way to reach voters with the first ever presidential TV ad, a series titled Eisenhower Answers America. Now, I'm not saying it was all because of me, but he did win that election. After Ike, things really took off for me. In 1960, Kennedy and Nixon met on stage and, thanks to me, in the living room of 75 million people for the first ever televised presidential debate. People who listened in through radio thought Nixon did better, but people who got the whole picture of the debate through me said that Kennedy had won. Clearly, I was something new altogether, something that would require something more from individuals who hoped to and held the highest office in the United States. Now, instead of just a nice voice, it helped to have a nice face, too. That's something Kennedy figured out pretty quickly. After me, the people didn't just want their presidents to be politicians. They wanted them to be film stars as well.
Hey, I'm social media. If you don't know me, well, where have you been? I first came on the scene in 1994, but I really took off by 2006 when platforms like MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter had been launched. The 2008 presidential election was the first time where I was utilized in presidential campaigns, and President Obama is considered the first social media president. By 2012, I was all the rage, and ever since, I have been an essential part of presidential campaigns. Twitter has been the biggest platform for presidents and presidential candidates. Twitter allows presidents, or more often their media teams, to post something directly to the people. Because of this, I've been compared a lot to the radio and TV, but I've got way more going on. What is posted on my platforms needs to grab people's attention and get straight to the point. In the case of Twitter, you've only got 280 characters to work with. This has made it so presidents' messages have become more straightforward and quippy on my platforms as compared to my media predecessors. Now, I'm great and all, but I admit I'm also a little problematic. While I do connect people in so many great ways and keep people informed, I can also really amplify the political polarization of the US. As we saw recently with the banning of President Trump from pretty much all my platforms, I can unfortunately be utilized to incite hate and spread false information. Well, I'm still relatively new on the scene, and presidents are still learning how to use me most effectively. I'm a channel for them to connect directly with the people, but there's a lot of navigating to be done amongst all my conflicting noise. I'm going to continue to grow and evolve, and presidents will have to continually adapt their messages to ever-growing platforms and increasingly divided citizens, just as they have adapted to any new media throughout history.